Okay, welcome everyone to Curious Vlad. Let's begin with a prayer as we always do, and then we'll get right to it. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Okay, welcome everyone. We're starting with a nice group of people. It's great to see. I just want to touch briefly on yesterday. We had a lovely day at St. Vladimir's. It was nice. We don't always have all three of us priests together, but that was nice that we were able to commune from three chalices, and we even tried to kiss three crosses, and I think it kind of worked, and there weren't really any major catastrophes that happened. But anyway, I like that when we get to do that. So I thought that was a nice day, and I thought it was a really good gospel for us, that gospel of the larger barns after the great harvest. I think that's really useful for us, and as we're having conversations in our parish about stewardship, it just worked out really well. A couple of people asked me about the very high number of people in our parish that are living in poverty, according to what Marina said, and I think people didn't get the irony, although some people have gotten it over time, but I'll make it clear now. So essentially, if folks exercise their stewardship by credit card or check, then the treasurer can look and see how a family is giving. I don't see, but on purpose, and I think that's the way that has to be. It's not good if the priest knows who's giving what. So I don't know that, but we're able to track it. And so anyway, if you assume that people are tithing, then if you look at if people give, let's say, $100 a month, that means that they're making $1,000 a month, and that's the point that Marina was making, that we need to be more serious in reflecting about our stewardship and about our tithing, because there's a lot of families that are giving about that amount, and thank God for that. That's not a complaint. It's just this is the time of year when we often reflect on these things, and I think it's good for us to do that. So anyway, that's what that was about, and please don't hesitate to reach out to our financial ambassadors. That's Marina, who spoke yesterday if you were at church. That's Mikhail Fisenkov, who's our treasurer, and that's Henri Sorel, who is one of our young parish council members, and they're all bilingual. So if you prefer to talk to them in Russian, that is absolutely okay. I want to also point out to folks, please don't forget that we have midnight liturgies every Saturday of December, except for the 16th. Saturday the 16th we can't, because we have our bake sale the next day, and we can't. Everything needs to be set up ahead of time. And this will be the last year, actually, that the bake sale will be in the church. After all of the years of our parish, this will be 42 years. I guess that the bake sale has been in the church, and this will be the last time, because by next year, we'll be into our new social space. So that's really exciting. But we'll have midnight liturgy every Saturday except for the 16th. So try to at least come to one. I think that it's really awesome to be able to serve liturgy in the middle of the night like the ancient Christians did. We're not hiding from Romans necessarily as they were, but nonetheless, it's really spiritually beneficial, I think, and especially during a fasting period, it's really nice that we have that opportunity. So please take advantage of that. Okay, so I'm going to start with questions that have been submitted, and the first one. It's one of those questions where you could have a huge long conversation about this, and I'm going to try not to get in the weeds, although it's a topic that I do find interesting. The first thing I'm going to do is paste the life of Saint Olga into the into the discussion chat, because the question is about the history of the Russian Orthodox Church. And this particular life of St. Olga has a ton of really interesting information about that history. So if you would like to have that, please go into the chat and open up the link so you can look at it afterwards. I'll also try to put it in the comments of the video once we post it. But if you're seeing the video and I haven't done that yet, just leave a snarky comment in the video, and I'll be sure to post it because I'll see that snarky comment. Okay, so what most people, I think, have, what idea they have about the history of the Russian Orthodox Church probably comes from St. Vladimir and the great baptism of Rus that happened in 989. But the reality of the situation is that for some generations, perhaps maybe 100 years, maybe 150 years, maybe 200 years, maybe that's a little too far, but there was a parallel structure in Rus of paganism and Christianity. We have to remember that that northern coast of the Black Sea was part of the Byzantine Empire, and so the Vikings, essentially, who were ruling over the Slavs in that part of the world, had adequate access to Christianity. It wasn't that they didn't know about Christianity. That was not the question. They did know about Christianity. The question was, what part did Christianity play in this pagan society? And so Saint Vladimir was sort of the crescendo. He was the end of that long kind of slope. And without going into too many details, you can read those in the life of Saint Olga. There were several sort of attempts at bringing Christianity in an organized way to that state of Rus. This is not Russia already. This is long before the sort of concept of Russia. It's the before Russia time. And it's a very interesting life of the saint. But in any case, in 989, we can say that, yes, like this was officially kind of the beginning of Christianity in Rus. Although if you look at some of the treaties that the Rus signed with the Byzantines in those about 100 years before that, or 150 years before that, the treaties mandate that the leaders take the oath to follow the treaty either in the pagan temple or in the Christian church. So it's obvious that there's this parallel society going on there. In 989, we have the official sort of baptism of Rus, and Beverly, I'm going to mute. If you could mute, because there's some sound coming from you just when you're not speaking, that'll be great. So at that time, Vladimir decided, after sending emissaries out to all the great religions, to Roman Catholicism, to the Buddhists, to Muslims, to Jews, so on and so forth, and getting the word back from all of those emissaries. When he got the word from the emissary who had been sent to the Byzantines, and they told him that when we were in the church, we didn't know if we were in heaven or on earth. He said, okay, that's going to be good for us. He didn't like Islam specific for various reasons. The main one being that no alcohol was allowed. I mean, that's what it says in the Chronicles, so it's good for us to understand that. But in any case, he liked that Byzantine idea, but he was still a pagan prince. So he went to Byzantium with his navy. They laid siege to the city, and when the Byzantines sued for peace, Vladimir said, I want missionaries for my people, and I want the emperor's daughter as my empress. And the Byzantines agreed, and Vladimir got rid of all of his harem and everything else, and lived started to move towards living as a Christian. But he still wasn't a Christian. He had gone to Byzantium to take Christianity as a war, not as someone in peace. But what happened was he went blind after the missionaries came, and this is why we call him a second Paul. If you listen to the Troparion that we sing every Sunday morning, he's called the second Paul, because all of his pagan prince friends were off pillaging and looting and doing whatever it is that they do, and he couldn't go because he was blind. And so the only people that were left for him were the missionaries, and he began to actually listen, to hear the words that they were saying, not seeing Christianity as a sort of part of a political movement that would be good for his people, but as something that was true. And when he was baptized, scales fell from his eyes, just as they did from Paul's eyes, and he began to live and to govern as a true Christian. So this is the beginning of the end of paganism. If it's even sort of ended at this point, I don't know, but of course it was greatly wounded and has never been able to really recover. And Christianity spread throughout Rus and then throughout Russia, all the way across Asia, into North America via Alaska, and so on and so forth. So that's the rough history of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, there's a lot of things that happened between Vladimir and today, but there's so much. I know who asked the question, and that person is on our conference here today. If that person wants to ask more specific question, I'm more than happy to go into that, but it's a lot, and I don't think that we want to get too far into the weeds here. But anyway, I leave that to you, so you can either post, if somebody wants to know more or this motivated another question, you can post in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. I hope that was interesting. Okay, so we said that we would do that, but do read that Life of St. Olga. It's long. It's really long. So please do that. Okay, Lori, you're asking a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question. And thank you so much. Maybe at the end, if nobody else has any more questions, you could say a little bit more.
Sure. Is there a specific part that you would like to know more about?
No, you just said between Vladimir and now.
Yeah, 1,000 something years. So I'll be more than happy to talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, a couple of interesting things about the Russian Church. It really took the call to go forth and baptize all nations very seriously. Like each Orthodox Church kind of has their really strong point, right? So we kind of look at the Greeks as like the great theologians. You know, Archbishop Peter told me when he was in Belgrade as a student, he said, you know, many times on Sunday morning, I would pass all of these full cafes of people drinking coffee and smoking, you know, and not going to church. He said, but you know what? If there's a persecution, the Serbs will push you out of the way to be murdered first, you know. And for the Russians, it's probably, you know, this missionary zeal. And so every church kind of has their thing. And I think that really came right from the beginning. This idea of going across Asia and bringing Christ to everyone, that's still going on today. The Russian church is still very zealous, and we are trying to do that ourselves, at least in our area. We're trying to sanctify our area that the Lord has given us here in Michigan with God's help and our efforts. So anyway, I hope that helps. Okay, let's start tackling a few. Okay, Lynn, we had a question about will there be a live stream to Saturday night services? Do you mean the midnight services, Linda? Because I noticed there wasn't one this week. So I'll ask Father Dimitri to set that up. I think that's what you mean. The one that starts at Friday night at 10 o'clock. Yes. And goes, yeah. Okay. I also tried to jump on and I noticed there wasn't one. So it means that it wasn't programmed. So I'll ask Father Dimitri to put that into the program, and it'll be live beginning at 10 o'clock every Friday. Thank you for asking that. I had forgotten that I tried to listen and I couldn't. Father Colin served this one, and I think he'll probably serve the next one, and then I'll take a few, and Father Dimitri, and I really enjoy those services. Don't forget though that we have the one which has become really like super active and a lot of fun, which is the midnight service that begins on the 31st of December at 10 o'clock and goes into the new year. That's really a wonderful one to do because that's the feast of Saint Boniface, and Saint Boniface is the patron saint of drunkards. I'm not making it up. That just happens to be the day. Well, nothing is random with God, right? That's providential. That the 19th of December on the old calendar, or January 1st, is the feast of the martyr Boniface, and he is the patron saint of those who abuse alcohol. So it's the perfect day to be at church from the 31st of December into the 1st of January. Okay, I heard a hand go up. Now let's see who put it up. Oh, I see it's Elena. And Elena, was that you or was that your mom? Okay, very good.
Good evening, Father. My question is just about prostration. More specifically for Christmas and Easter Mass, when is it appropriate?
Okay, good. That's a great question. And just let me quickly pull up. I'm going to put a link in because we have a nice sheet that kind of goes over that. It's not exactly the question that you asked, and I will answer your question, but I want to take a second to share this with people because I do think that it's a very useful one for us to have. Because if when we go to church on weekdays, we often feel a little bit lost because that's when some prostrations are being done, and we may wonder why that's happening. So I just put that into the chat. So if you'd like to have a look at that, open it up now so that when we close, it won't disappear. On feasts of the Lord, which includes Sunday, because that's resurrection, right? It's a little Pascha. Every Sunday is a little Pascha. All feasts of the Lord do not have prostrations. So that's Christmas. That's, of course, that's Pascha, that's Transfiguration, so on and so forth. So if it's a feast of the Lord, we don't do prostrations in the church. We only stand. Now, most of us go to church most of the time on Feast of the Lord. So it seems really weird to us if we go to church and all of a sudden there's these people on the floor beside us and we don't know what's happening. So that's why I put the link into the chat. The honest truth is, most of the time, for most days of the year, we do prostrations. It's just those aren't the days that we usually go to church. So like today, it's a Feast of the Mother of God. But on these days, at the consecration of the gifts, we do make a prostration. Or when the gifts are brought out for the communion of the people, we do make a prostration, just as it says in the handout. So it's only for feasts of the Lord that we do not do prostrations at all. So, and now, so I can see somebody thinking, wait a second, on Pentecost, we do all of these prostrations. That's right, because that is Vespers for Monday. That is not Sunday. So the kneeling Vespers of Pentecost, that's already the first service of the Holy Spirit Monday. So Mondays you can do prostrations, but Sundays you don't. So I hope that's helpful. And the link may be helpful too.
But for Easter, that, because I know that like in the Serbian church, when we have this I don't know what it's called in English. It's wooden and it's full of flowers and the icon.
Yeah, the Lord's tomb, right, where the Lord is laying in his the icon of him laying in the tomb.
So the priest, before starting the service, he prostrates. So is
yes, that's still Saturday. That's Holy Saturday because we haven't hit midnight yet. So we do prostrations in front of the plashenica, in front of the epitaphion, the winding sheet. Essentially, it's an icon of Christ laying in the grave, and that is placed in the middle of the church on Holy Friday at the Vesper service, which is usually at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, depends on the parish, and it stays there right until the beginning of the Paschal Divine Liturgy. Then the priest brings it into the altar, and it stays on the altar for the next 40 days until Ascension. So there are prostrations done. People will come to the Paschal Vigil, and as long as that's in the middle of the church, you can prostrate in front of it. As soon as it disappears, essentially, we're starting Pascha, and we don't do prostrations again until Pentecost.
Okay. Thank you, Father.
Okay. You're welcome. That's a great question. Okay, so let's tackle a few of the ones that were sent in. Now, I'll be honest, when Father Colin hosts, I do not watch. Because I don't want, there's no way for me to watch serendipitously, like quietly, secretly, and I don't want him to feel like I'm like trying to, spy on what's happening here. I can always watch later if I want, although I rarely do. So he may have answered some of these questions. So if he did, I hope that my answer will not be wildly divergent. That would be kind of bad. Okay, so we'll start with this one. I have a friend who's an atheist. He's struggling with questions. And he asked me, if there is God and he is good, why are people damned from the start? They are innocent babies, yet they start off wrong. How can I explain this to my friend? Okay, so let's pick this apart right away. So if you have a friend who's an atheist who's struggling, he's probably, or she is probably more agnostic. Like, if the person is thinking about this and struggling with this is a person who is trying to find faith, obviously. So we want to try to support and be loving towards people who are in this kind of a situation. So it's an interesting question because it contains a fallacy. So why are people damned from the start? People are not damned from the start. That I'm not sure exactly the context of the question, but the God loves everyone. He loves people who are Orthodox Christians, and he loves people who are Muslims, and he loves people who don't know him. He loves everyone. God created and creates everyone so that he can share his love with them. The thing is, it's our job who know him to make sure that others who want to find him get a chance to do that. So we do that through our lives. Occasionally we do it through our words. But mostly people know that we're Christians. And if we live a life which is according to the gospel, then people will be like, that's what I need. Because people are seeking something. There's a hole in every human that only can be filled by God. And people try to fill that with drugs and alcohol, and loose living and all kinds of things like that. It never works. Nothing fills that hole except God. And so when someone says, oh, I'm an atheist, well, doubtful. Because in the history of the world, there's never been a human society that was atheist. They gave it a shot in Eastern Europe. It even didn't work when it was, enforced by the government. No matter what, people kept their faith. And so, yes, a lot of people apostatized under pressure, and that's understandable. But there's never been a human society, which didn't have faith. And so when we have someone who says they announce they're an atheist, to me, that's just saying, please help me. I need to find God. So we should have a real magnanimous approach to those folks. So man is not damned. Man is not damned. Man has the potential to attain to God's likeness. That's absolutely the opposite of being damned. Man is made in God's image. That is, we have free will, but we can attain to the image, right? We're made in the likeness. I may have said that wrong. We're made in the likeness, which is free will. We have free will, and we can attain to the image if we struggle and work and try to find God. And so this is something I think that is really important. If someone says this to us, if there is God, why is there suffering? This is a different question, and is a relatively easy one to answer. It's so easy, we have to be careful not to be flippant about it. The answer is because God made everything good. If we read the Genesis account, which is good to read from time to time, I think, we see that God made everything good. So everything is good, but now there is suffering. Well, it's because of the fall. Death came into the world because of the fall. So again, we shouldn't be like offhanded about that. We shouldn't be flippant about that. But that's the reality. And so we have to convey that to people in a way which is loving and say, yeah, God didn't choose that. Man chose that. Man chose that. But God came into the world. That is, Jesus Christ was incarnate so that man could overcome even the fall and again be reconciled to God. So we should try to always end such conversations in a very positive way, trying to encourage people and to show them a path. We don't have to connect all the dots for them, but we should at least try to show that there are dots. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I don't know who asked that question. I can't tell when you put it in the form that we have on purpose. It's anonymous. So if it's somebody here and you want to ask a follow-up, please do. In the Psalter, there can be found violent, condemnatory, good word, language used against specific people, nations who are transgressing God's law. In some cases, the psalmist is asking the Lord to destroy them. How are we to read this as Christians who are striving not to condemn sinners, but to pray for their salvation? So I think that one thing we have to understand is that the Old Testament is not the New Testament, and the New Testament is not the Old Testament. Again, I'm not trying to say that in a flippant way, but the Old Testament exists to bring man to the Messiah. It's all about preparing mankind for the Messiah. Now, of course, the Old Testament also has a history. It tells the history of God's people at that time and the struggles that they had, the wars that they fought, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of David's words are very strong. What's interesting, for instance, I'll just choose one. What is the Psalm number? I forgot. Doesn't matter. You'll know it. Where it says that we shall dash the infants' heads against the stones. We sing that as we prepare for Great Lent. So the church is not singing this to promote infanticide. This is understood to be evil thoughts. This understanding is about evil thoughts, and that also was the case in even in the Old Testament. That was understood even from that time. And so when you read the fathers and their explanations of these things, which is really helpful and not always available in English, and I'm sorry for that. So if you have questions, if you read something and you're like, this doesn't make sense or this seems wrong, please come to me or to Father Colin about that, and we're happy to talk to you about that. A lot does exist in English. It's not always easy to get your hands on, but this is just one example, and it's an extreme example, but that's why I wanted to bring it to you. This idea of dashing infants heads against the rocks. It's not about killing children, of course not. It's about battling and trying to destroy the evil thoughts that attack us, especially as we enter into Great Lent during our time, our season, our spring of repentance. So I hope that's helpful. And again, if there are follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to do that. Okay, the role that sin plays in illness. Okay, if we read, when we read the gospel, it's clear that there's a couple of things going on, and even the Lord leads the apostles a little bit down the path that sin and illness are always connected, to prove the point that they're not. Remember, it's the last Sunday of Pascha, blind man. Remember when the apostles come to the Lord, and say, who sinned that this man is blind, him or his parents? And the Lord answers, neither, but this was for the glory of God. And so I think that this is a very important piece for us, because sometimes it's obvious to us that a sickness is connected to sin, but a lot of times it's not. But always it can be for God's glory if we bear it as Christians, right? The reality of the situation, I hate to break it to you, I hope I'm not going to ruin anybody's night. We're going to suffer, at least some in this life. There's very few people that exit this life without any suffering, right? It's just not, it's part of being a human. There will be some struggles, there will be suffering. So we have to decide now, while we're not struggling, am I going to suffer like a pagan who's going to whine and complain and grumble against God, or am I going to accept what the Lord gives me as best for my salvation? Now, we may decide that, yes, I'm definitely not going to grumble. I'm definitely going to accept this, even with thanks to God, because I know that He gives only good. We may not attain to that high ideal, but I think we really have to strive for that. Like, that's got to be our decision. That's got to be our desire. And the Lord, in that very important gospel narrative, when the apostles come to Him about the blind man, teaches us it's not always about sin. Often it is, because just as in this life we choose where we will be in the next. Will we strive to be with God in this life? If so, then we will be with God in the next. And if we reject God in this life, then we will not be with Him in the next. It's up to us. It's not a random occurrence. It's not like some spin of the wheel. We're making that decision. And that's often, not completely, but often true when it comes to sickness. If we live a life which exposes us to a lot of illness, spiritual illness and physical illness, those things often end up going together. So I hope that answers the question. Lori asked at 8:15, will there be vodka? So I must have just blasted right through that. If you want to give a little bit more detail about that, the answer is probably yes, but December 31st. Well, after the service, perhaps on January 1st, not on December 31st, but after the service. We usually have a big bonfire after the liturgy when we finish up at whatever 2 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 in the morning on January 1st. And I believe that people bring refreshments. I don't know that for sure, but I'd be surprised. Okay, well, it's okay if you were kidding. All right, so next, let's go on to the next one, and that people have submitted. How or wait. That's what I want to do. Good. Okay, I heard a hand go up. Let me go back. That is okay. Yelena, again.
I'm gonna ask for Alana because she's too shy to ask.
Okay.
So in school, the Catholics have an Advent, and she's asking if we have one as well as Orthodox Christians.
I often hear people call this Lent the Advent also, because if you think of what's the word Advent, it means about Christ coming into the world. It's like incarnation. It's a preparation for the incarnation. So in the West, they often I've seen they have like this thing of 5 candles or something, and one is lit each week of the Advent or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but I hear people call it that, and it's perfectly okay to call it that. It's usually at least in the languages like Russian, Greek, and Serbian, and the sort of Orthodox quote unquote languages, it's usually called Nativity Fast, but it's the same idea. I just think that in the West, most of that fasting piece was lost. The idea of preparing for the Lord's nativity remains, but the idea of the fasting part seems to have gone. I don't think that there's a special fast at this time of year in the West. Does that answer your question, Dana? All right, good.
There's one more though.
Okay.
Why did God let Eve eat the apple?
Well, that's a really important question. And the answer is the only way. So if God created us for love, to share his love with us, he also wants us to love him. The only way to love someone is if you have complete free will, right? Because if I, Yelena, come to you and I have my gun and I say, "Don't you love me?" Of course, you're going to say, "Yes, I love you very much." Put the gun away. This is like depriving you of your free will, right? But if I come to you and I'm unarmed and I just say, "Do you love me?" You're going to give me the real answer. You still might not love me, but you'll give the real answer because you're not under any pressure, right? So God allows us the absolute free will to do good or do bad. And unfortunately, our first parents, Adam and Eve, they chose not to do good. And what did they do? They broke the fast, actually, right? The Lord gave them a fasting rule. Don't eat from that tree. But they did. It's interesting. Many of the fathers say they still could have stayed in paradise if they only would have repented. But they didn't, right? Adam said, "The woman, she's the one who gave it to me." And Eve said, "It was the snake." And the Lord said, "Well, then we're going to have to leave. Because if we sin, but we repent, maybe we could stay. But if we sin and we blame, then we need to do some work." And so then for thousands of years, man struggled to prepare for the Lord to come into the world. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Beverly asked a question, and Beverly, everybody can see your name there, so please don't be upset that I'm using it. I've yet to attend a service, and I'm intimidated by rituals I don't understand. Please advise a newbie. Okay, so that's totally understandable, and I get that. I think that it can be very intimidating to go into something new. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share our photo album site, because I think just looking and seeing that there are other humans there and kind of seeing what's going on there can be really, really useful. So I'm going to put that in right now. There you go. So I would suggest to you, please visit there and have a look. I think just seeing what we do and what the church looks like and what the people look like and the clergy and so on and so forth will be really helpful in taking away a little bit of that anxiety. We also have a really nice video series that we often share with folks where you can kind of look at a few things ahead of time. And it also covers some of the teachings of the church, but I think that it's a real useful one. And I'll put that out right now. Give me a second in the chat as well, so you can have a look at that. Second. Is that catechism? There it is. I'll just put the whole catechism resources page there, but you want to look at the videos. They're towards the bottom. Okay, there's that. And there you go. So I hope that that helps a little bit. And what I would suggest to you, I'm putting my email into, have a look at those things, and then send me an email, or go to our website. You'll find a place where you can make an appointment with me, or give me a call, send me a text. I'm happy to talk about those things, and maybe we could even meet and you could see the church before there's anybody else there, just to get some more comfort. I hope that helps. Lori has raised her hand. Please go, Lori.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you said to Beverly. When I've only been coming to St. Vladimir for a year and a half, and when I first started coming, I didn't know anything at all about the Orthodox, well, very little about the Orthodox faith, because I was raised Protestant, and I just sat for several Sundays on the sidelines and just, watched everything, observed everything, and I didn't participate because I was learning what to do, but just coming and sitting and observing, along with the links that you put into the chat, I would think that would be perfectly fine to do as well.
Absolutely. I think it would be great. I'm looking, Beverly, since you're in South Carolina. Let me see if that will work. I don't know if it will. There are a lot of Orthodox churches in South Carolina now, because of course a lot of people are moving there. I would just Google like Orthodox Church Somerville, South Carolina, and I'm sure you're going to find something. But feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. Oh, I see that Ben invited you. Oh, great. I'm glad you're here. Okay, Linda asked a question. Conversation about atheism. The point that the gentleman was trying to make, I think, is that according to our faith, children are born with original sin through no fault of their own. They are marked as unfavored in that way. How is this fair or just or good for the poor innocent baby? How does that make God a good God? Okay, good. So again, this goes back. This goes back to the fall again. The reality is that all of us are born with original sin. All of us. Even Mother of God was born with original sin. She was the most perfect of humans, the greatest of all the saints, but she wasn't even without original sin. So that's just part of our human nature. It's part of being a human in the post-fall world. The beauty of that is that, as probably everyone knows, but in any case I'll say that we practice infant baptism in the church, and that's essentially always been the practice of the church. Not 100%. There was a time when infant baptism was not practiced in the church. It was a very short time. Gave us some pretty good saints, though, like St. Gregory the Theologian and St. Basil the Great, but it was like for just a few generations at that time. And otherwise, the church has always practiced infant baptism, because we understand that the children need to be with God from the very beginning, from infancy. And when you go to our photo album page, which I linked there, you'll see a lot of pictures of baptisms and a lot of pictures of children being brought into the church after their baptism, and then the children begin to partake of Holy Communion already as infants in the church. So, Linda, thank you for the clarification, and I hope what I said was a little bit helpful along those lines as well. Okay, question. How or where did so much of the Orthodox faith get lost? I think that means in the West. Did much of it end when Luther created Protestantism? When did angels, the saints, and church fathers and the Nicene Creed get thrown away, and by whom? I'm also curious about this so I can intelligently speak with my former Protestant friends. Okay, so there's a couple questions here. First, how or where did so much of the Orthodox faith get lost? So the understanding of the church is that when the Great Schism took place, that essentially the Western Church, the Catholic Church, left the church, right? The adjective Orthodox was already being used at that time, but was not used from the beginning, as I think anyone who's done any church history understands that came between the sort of time of the Lord and this time, and earlier rather than later. But in any case, the church understands that the Catholic Church left, the Western Church left. Now, it wasn't just an instant. It wasn't like some magical thing that happened, a thunderclap, and like the whole West went into darkness and everything was bad. It was a process. You know, by the time the idea of papism got, let's say, to Ireland, that could have been like more than 100 years later, right? It wasn't like they were up on the internet or shooting emails to each other. So it was a process that happened gradually further and further to the West. But essentially, when the West cut itself off from the church, it cut itself off from grace. And so what you see is there's more and more of a reliance on man and reason and philosophy, and it's all about man. And it becomes more and more about man and less about God over time. That's a generalization, but this question, it requires a generalization. But that's essentially the case. The longer that the Western Church stayed away from the Orthodox Church, the more and more innovation came into it, and the less and less of the church that they left was reserved. So it became more about man and less about God, and so you have more and more of these innovations or changes, or things are forgotten or lost or whatever. So I'm more than happy to talk about this in much more detail, but that's essentially how the church sees it. So I think that we have to answer it that way. So it happened a long time before Luther, a long time. Although what's interesting, and you can find this easily online, there was a correspondence between Luther and the Patriarch of Constantinople. So the Lutherans, they understood that they weren't Catholic, they didn't want to be Catholics, and there was these other people who had left a long time ago, and maybe we have something in common. And it's pretty clear when you read the correspondence. There was very little in common. I mean, some, but it never became any kind of fruitful cooperation, because the Protestant church was going away. It was going farther away from the Orthodox Church by leaving the Catholic Church, we would say. But that's an interesting correspondence. I think there's 2 or 3 letters back and forth, and you can, like I said, you can find that online pretty easily. There's one other piece of that. Angels, saints, church fathers, Nicene Creed get thrown away again. That's so. The church fathers, even the Protestants, the early Protestants, especially those you might call reformers, like Luther, you could argue that there's a difference between the first generation and all the rest. It's kind of an academic argument that, like, there's reformers and then there's Protestants after that. It's pretty clear after the first generation, things get out of control fast. I mean, it just gets really crazy. But in any case, there was this idea, because it was also in the Catholic Church, and that first generation of Protestants had been raised in the Catholic Church. They understood about church fathers, but they were essentially rejected even in the beginning, even in that first generation, but certainly by the second. And the idea of saints, that was already rejected by Luther for the most part. Again, we could go into some details about that, but the saints, as we understand them in the Orthodox Church, that was already rejected by Luther. Excuse me. And the Nicene Creed, that kind of, I don't know, honestly, did the Protestants try to keep that or not? My guess is no. I'm not an expert on early Protestantism, but that is something that you could be easily looked up. I think the Apostles' Creed, so-called, came much later. That's my understanding. I could be wrong about that piece, though. So, okay, I hope that was useful. Lori, the Lutherans kept the Nicene Creed, I think is what you're saying. Yeah, I think so too. I think that Apostles' Creed came a lot later, that we found. But again, you can even see the Nicene Creed still in some of the Protestant churches. I think the what we would call the higher churches. Okay, I answered everything. Now, it's on the rest of us to ask questions. I think I answered all the questions in the chat too. We went through a decent chunk of an hour here, but I don't want to sign off prematurely because there's quite a few people on the call, and I think they're on the conference, and I think there may be some questions hiding out there. So I wonder if anyone has questions now after listening to me talk for all that time that were either spurred by those many words that I said, or that they already had brought with them and wanted to ask at the beginning of the program, but I wouldn't be quiet. Mark Jaffe, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about how the exact details of some of the fasting days, within the fasts are determined. I mean, I know some things are kind of set, like in the nativity fast, you can have fish on the weekends. But I wonder for the other days, how it's determined. I mean, what's a strict fast? What's oil and wine? And or a fish day, and what goes into making that decision? I know the day of the week has something to do with it too, but
it does.
What else?
Yeah, it does.
What else goes into that determination?
Right. So essentially, the most important piece has to do with what's happening in church. So what happens in the church determines what happens on our table. So the higher rank of service that it is, the less strict the fast. So the simpler the service, the stricter the fast. That's the general rule. In the Nativity fast, as actually in the Great Lent, the weekends are less strict. That's actually a canon of the church. You can't have a strict fast day on a Saturday or a Sunday. Even Holy Saturday allows wine. Strictly speaking, it doesn't allow oil, but wine is always allowed on that day. And that makes sense. You can't have liturgy without wine, right? So the idea is that there's always going to be liturgy on Saturday and Sunday. I know that doesn't happen in every parish. It even doesn't happen in our parish that we have every Saturday, but nonetheless, the idea is there's always going to be liturgy on Saturday and Sunday, and therefore it can't be a super strict fast day. You at least have to have wine, otherwise how are you going to have liturgy? So, and if you notice, and I do this according to Archbishop Peter's instruction, and I think it's a good one, that you might have this calendar. Let's see if I can, yeah, everybody probably has seen this calendar. Whoops, it makes me disappear. Anyway, the calendar that we send out annually, you may find that there's a little disconnect between that and our parish calendar. Why? Because if we're having liturgy on a day, it's going to be a day with wine and oil for the parish because we're having liturgy, right? It doesn't make any sense. You couldn't have a strict fast day, strictly speaking, for the parish if you're going to serve liturgy. Now, in a place where there's liturgy served every single day, maybe they're a little more strict about those strict fast days, but in our parish and in all parishes essentially in the West, it's not served every day. So if there's liturgy, then there's wine. Now, pre-sanctified liturgy is not wine, so don't get too excited about Great Lent. That's a different animal altogether. But if there's liturgy, Saint John Chrysostom or Saint Basil the Great or Saint James, then there will be at least wine on the day. But you're right that Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays of the weekdays of Nativity Lent are less strict. Wednesdays and Fridays are more strict. And Saturdays and Sundays are least strict. I hope that added a little light to the thing, or maybe it just confused everyone. I'm not sure. Mark, what do you think? Did that help?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Okay. There's a hand, and it's Lena. Go ahead.
So, when we cross in church and then we touch the floor, why do we touch the floor?
It's a good question. So the question is, sometimes we see people, they'll make the sign of the cross in church and they'll touch the floor. So the answer is, remember we were talking about how on some days we prostrate, like we go all the way to the ground and put our head on the floor. I think that some folks, on days when we don't go all the way to the floor, they sort of make the sign of the cross and will bend down all the way to the floor, kind of like, well, I can't put my knees on the floor, but at least I'm going to make as deep a bow as I can, right? But if you notice, there's different sort of levels of this. Some people will just kind of bow from their waist a little bit. Other people will bow more deeply. None is really right or wrong as long as we make the sign of the cross and we bow. But Archbishop Peter was talking to me the other day, and he asked me to stress to people, so this is the first time that I've had a chance to do it, that we don't break the cross, as he said. So you first make the sign of the cross, and then you do your bow. You don't sort of make your bow and make the sign of the cross. Like, if you're doing that, where are you pointing? Right? You're pointing down, which is not probably where you want to be pointing when you're making the sign of the cross. So you make your sign of the cross and then you bow, either from the waist or you make your prostration, but you don't sort of break the cross by making the sign of the cross while you're pointing at the floor. Good question, sweetie. Thank you. Did I answer it? Okay, good. All right, friends. How old are you? Are you 10, Helena?
I'm 9.
9. Okay, so if our brave 9-year-old can ask questions, I'm confident that our more seasoned adults can do the same. So let's let Elena be a motivation for us. Does anyone else have questions that they'd like to ask? Okay, we're gonna give you 3 chances, and then we'll say our prayer if no one else has questions. Going once, twice, twice and a half, 3 times. Okay, very good. I'm glad everyone was able to join us tonight. And for those who are joining us on the video and couldn't join us live, please ask questions in the comment section. We do keep an eye on that, and we do try to answer those questions. So even if you weren't able to join us live, you can still ask a question and we'll answer it. Or if you ask a really good question, we won't, because we'll save it for the next episode. All right, everyone, let's pray and then we'll say good night. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God, the Word, the very Theotokos. Thee do we magnify. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope everybody has a good night.
Good night. Bye.